Overseas.
Mr. Chairman.
I call the honourable member Dr David Clark.
Mr. Chairman, kia ora. I rise to speak to this bill. We will be supporting this bill in the Labour Party because the principles that it's based upon are ones that we can agree with. And it is delightful to stand in this House and to be supporting a bill that is actually incredibly important and might be likened to the oil that greases the wheels of commerce. It is so important to have transparency and clear and concise and easily understood reporting requirements so that information can flow to stakeholders so that good decision making ensues and our country prospers. The bill itself really has three key components. One is increased public accountability. And an entity is needing to be accountable to the public if it is effectively owned by the taxpayers and ratepayers, and that includes government departments, Crown entities and local authorities. I guess there's some irony, of course, that won't be lost on those following the debate at home, where this bill is designed to increase accountability across government departments, Crown entities and local authorities. And not long ago, we passed the legislation that is about privatising our energy assets. There's a referendum coming up, I think starting tomorrow, the postal ballot on topic the same. But that particular debate involved not only selling down New Zealand's best revenue generating assets, taking taxpayer ownership away from them into the hands of a few, but also reducing transparency. In that legislation, the OIA used to apply in respect of the state-owned enterprises. Members of the public could request information about them. There was a level of transparency there that was required. They were required to appear before select committees to be scrutinised so that the taxpayer interest was being looked after. And now, even though they are majority, only just 51% to be state-owned, a lower level of scrutiny is to apply. So here in this legislation, again we have the flip side of that, where we say again scrutiny is important. So there'll be no lost irony there, I'm sure, in the government's other actions, which we know were done for politically expedient reasons, based on an ideology of selling off, of privatising the gains and socialising the losses, something we've seen so often from this national government. But returning to the bill, the scrutiny that will apply to the bigger end of town, where there is a public interest. For example, an entity that takes deposits from the public or holds assets in a fiduciary capacity for broad groups of outsiders, like banks, insurers, mutual funds and those kinds of things. They will be required to report transparently, and that is a good thing. Those who receive donations and bequests direct from the public will be required to have an increased transparency. There's a test about economic significance, and I guess that boils down to the idea that size matters. There are some large entities that ought to report because their failure could have a regional economic impact, and that I guess does apply to the case raised by my colleagues just before. Their failure could have a regional impact that could be quite negative, and we think there of Christchurch and the lack of progress that's being made. There are other examples, of course, down my way. The Invermay, the proposal to gut Invermay, to take the scientists out of Otago and just destroy it, somehow transplant a highly functional scientific organisation somewhere else when the staff don't want it and have said they won't transfer, is another example of a failure in the regions. And that's despite Stephen Joyce's rhetoric about needing to have strong institutions in the regions to support business growth. So there's some deep irony in that we're passing a bill that talks about the importance of economic entities to regions, the importance of economic significance and transparency, when there are being deals done that are anything but transparent in terms of the business case for Invermaid. It's a very, very good example where it has not been made public, where information has been withheld, and where it seems that an ideological position is driving something rather than something that is genuinely in the public interest. The third criterion in the bill is around separation, Mr. Chair. And that,
Member,
Chair, yep.
Dr. David Clark.
That separation requires that owners or members of an entity, where they're likely to need financial statements if they don't manage the entity. So all of these things make sense at a fundamental level. Reducing compliance costs where they're not required, where there's small entities, where shareholders agree that they don't need comprehensive accounts to the extent that it's actually just simply about compliance. And then a clear requirement that where it does matter, where entities are public, large, or they're managing public funds, there is a higher level of compliance required. And that is a very sensible step. We know that good markets make excellent servants and poorly regulated ones make bad masters. And that's the basic principle, I think, that sits behind this kind of legislation: good regulation, making sure things flow well. And you know, we think of the global financial crisis. Have there been greater transparency there? Some of the worst edges of that, and perhaps the whole financial crisis might have been avoided, certainly in respect of the hedge funds involved. Now, simplification of reporting processes is something that creates efficiencies, and that's good. Where our businesses in our country spend so much time on compliance, the government opposite talks often about being business friendly. Certainly we see that when it comes to one or two of their mates in respect of Sky City, and we think of the casino deal, where Sky City's laughing all the way to the bank. They've got all the extra pokie machines, building a casino off the back of problem gambling, and profits for years to come, because the government had cornered itself through putting itself in a non-transparent deal, committing to getting something through before negotiating the deal to its end. We think of Chorus, what's coming up there. It has all the hallmarks of another deal by the government for the big end of town. We think of Rio Tinto, where money was handed over but was not thrown at them. But no jobs guarantee was asked for, so restructuring began the next day. Now that's the kind of shoddy deal that this government does with big business, but small business all the while is suffering in New Zealand. This government has passed so much compliance regulation that has disadvantaged small business. And we think of the child support payments that employers may now be required to enforce. You know, handling private information about their employees, which could lead to personal grievances in the worst possible situations, information that wasn't previously thought to be appropriate for business owners to have to handle or have responsibility for, and nor the compliance responsibilities, has just been lumped upon them. No consultation. That went through in a rushed budget process. No transparency. And again, we think of the paperboy tax. Now there are requirements on compliance that weren't there before. This is a government that keeps heaping compliance on small business. And then they talk about tax simplification. The Minister, Todd McClay, has talked about consulting on tax simplification. Well, it's been done overseas. There's plenty of working examples. But this government's big on talk when it comes to things that would support small business, but very, 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 very poor on action. We just simply don't see it. This is a government that is not the friend of small business. And that is a shame. And I guess that perhaps goes some way towards explaining why 2,500 fewer small businesses are being created every year under this government. This is a government that is failing to create jobs, is failing to create new businesses, and no wonder that they have the worst economic record of any government in New Zealand in the last 50 years. It's an appalling economic record. It's an appalling record on jobs. It is a government that should hang its head in shame. And I guess I am at least comforted that some helpful pieces of legislation, some sensible pieces of legislation, no doubt pushed by officials, are sneaking their way through. And this is one small step to helping make our our economy a little bit more efficient, to take out some of the unnecessary compliance, and that's why we're very pleased to support it on this side of the House, Mr Chair. Finally, just to say that we wish there would be more of this kind of thing, less of the deals done behind closed doors with big business and more of the cutting of compliance. That's what we would like to see in the Labour Party. We are sick to death of the additional burden put on businesses. They say that something like 15% of revenue for the smallest businesses in New Zealand, typically 15% goes on compliance, tax compliance. That's too much, Mr Chair.
I call the honourable member Andrew Williams.
Thank you very much, Mr Chairman, for calling me, and I hope you